May we begin with you, Your Excellency?
All right. Yes. Good evening, Venerables, ladies and gentlemen. I'm very happy to see you all here. We have been talking actually for a few minutes about wonderful things, such as our subject tonight, the peace. As we all know, the peace is a very, very important issue, but somehow that is not yet achieved as a common goal by all the humanities. When I look into my religion, which is Buddhism, it is quite simple and quite direct to see what does really the word peace means and how can it be achieved. But when we put into action, it is not that easy. It is quite simply understood when we look back to what happened to Prince Siddhartha, what we all call Buddha. He wasn't anything which is more or less than any of us, but he went through many things that most of us haven't been through. We will call it inner quest or a path which will make a person who he really is. As a result of what Buddha went through, as a human being, he attained what a human being can possibly attain. So that is perfect example for peace. As a Buddhist, I really appreciate very much for something like this one, which we are doing here. This is wonderful inspiration. When I look at the stationery here, I see Buddhism and Christianity. And when I came here, I met with this wonderful gentleman who is quite a few years older than me. Conventionally, needless to say that we are from two different sort of sources. The sources of knowledge, sources of wisdom. But one thing I am sure with my feeling, with my limited understanding, is that we are for the same thing. What Buddha taught is simply a person, how can he be a good person? And my understanding about Christianity with friends with whom I have been very, very briefly, but in many occasions talked and explored, I don't see anything different from that. So I feel very happy with this kind of occasion because we are not trying to please each other, but we are being open to each other and using the advantage of the great step that evolutionary process of modernization achieved. So we are taking advantage of it. Olden days, for a Tibetan monk like myself, to talk about peace and also to have a kind of opportunities to meet with those religious practitioners of other line, almost impossible. Maybe not necessary those days. But now it is unavoidable, and in fact it is beautiful. So since I have very little time, I don't want to go on too much on that side. Now the issue, the peace. When I have been meeting with individuals and sharing with them my limited understanding of the teaching of Buddha, I never met with anyone who disagree with peace. But I met with more than enough individuals who are cynical about peace. I respect that, because cynicism, I feel, is universal teacher, universal guru. But there is a limit. You can't always be cynical. Then you are a fool. To be cynical for a purpose is very wise. When I meet with people, those who say, it is wonderful inspiration and it is really nice thing that people talk about peace, march for peace, put peace posters up and organize kind of peace conferences, meetings. They say it is wonderful, but they have such a enormous BUT which follows that. They say, but there was so many things happening which are related with peace. There wasn't so much achieved through those happenings. And all kind of cynicism involved, which is true. But I don't think those kind of efforts are altogether useless, because those kind of efforts are necessary. People need reminder, so those kind of efforts reminds people. But on top of that, then I think people like us, quite few of us are here tonight. People like us who have some kind of inspirations about peace, who have some kind of beliefs in that human beings are capable of making human life better. I believe that. I'm sure all of you believe that. Otherwise, why you come here? So, since we see and understand, honestly, the human beings are capable of making human life better, then we are responsible for making best out of it. Especially religious people. It is number one thing that a religious person have to be involved is to apply the religion into the life. Take responsibility what religion is for. When I look into Buddhism, Buddha did not teach to make himself famous. Buddha did not teach to gather large number of followers. Why he want large number of followers? Buddha did not teach his teaching for anything but except one thing. Buddha, by definition, he awakened his ultimate potential as a human being. And that ultimate potential which he awakened is something which all of us have. So, he shared everything that made him to become Buddha to all of us who can apply that to become like Buddha. That is the only reason why Prince Siddhartha, after many years of practice, after his realization, he gave teachings. And that he taught for more than 40 years. We can't say human beings are getting degenerated. But there is sort of one part which is currently, continuously, I will consider little bit like a downfall, whether we like it or not. Because there is tremendous amount of underestimations and overestimations. When we look at materialism, there is overestimation. When we look at spiritual, there is underestimation. Out there is 10 times more important than in here. I think humanity is becoming a little bit like bamboo. The bamboo outside is really hard. It can cut, but inside there's nothing. When I travel, I find large number of people everywhere. They say, the life doesn't make any sense. That's one thing which I always hear. And then people say, all these things I have been doing for past 40 years, 50 years, that doesn't make any sense. I hear that. And also people say, I don't like myself. Some people even say, I hate myself. Well, all of these things are kind of sign that something is not quite right. Despite of all of that, I don't think we are altogether hopeless, because we have all the means to make something out of this present situation. As you know, I am follower of Vajrayana Buddhism. In Vajrayana Buddhism, there's one simple principle which is introduced. It says, you don't have to waste anything. Even the worst situation, you can use it. So, this worst situation which we are going through, we can use it. And by dealing with the situation very properly, we get best out of it. I think there is three things involved for peace as our responsibility. It can be, of course, said in many ways, but roughly, briefly speaking. The first thing is individual peace. That is number one. You see, if you don't have peace within yourself, you cannot do anything. A doctor tried to cure patient, have to have medicine, and he had to know. Otherwise, he better give up try to cure people. So, a person who say, I wish for peace, I want you to do something for world peace, you must have peace within yourself. That has to be developed. And when peace is within yourself, peace of mind, the gentleness, softness, the compassion, the clearness. You can't afford to be confused. If you are confused, then you try to do something for others, then you might make others confused. I don't think that's right. I heard a word, I think this is something people around here use. One gentleman told me that the pathway to hell is paved with goodwills, or something like that. Forgive me if I'm wrong. But, I don't really agree with it 100%, but there is something. Even we have good intentions, that's not good enough. We have to have the capabilities. So, we have the potentials, but if we don't do something with it, we cannot expect to have capabilities. So once we develop peace within ourselves, then we should develop peace in our family. A husband and a wife, they can't get along, but then they say, individually, I wanted to do something for world peace. That's good intention, but I will doubt for the result. Number one, he and she should get along. And parents and children, even the wolves get along quite well. So the human beings who are responsible for the peace among human beings, the parents and children should get along. And one last thing, that is environment. It is very important for us to take care of our home. This planet is our home. Whether we like it or not, this is our home. We are the residents of this home. As you know, every day, hundreds of thousands of new human beings come to this planet as a child. Every day. And we are here, quite few already. So, our future generation need this planet. We use this planet, but we should not overuse it. We should take best out of it, but only what we need. So I think the environment is very, very important part of the world peace. Anyway, thank you very much for listening, and I think my time is over. Is it true? Yes. And I I'm looking forward that the wonderful person, the bishop, and myself, we will be having a kind of discussion later. And also I like very much that I like to hear what Bishop have to say. And also we're supposed to have some kind of question-answer session at the end. I'm looking forward for that as well. Thank you for listening.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Your Reverence.
Thank you, Madam Chairperson. Venerable Rinpoche and Venerable friends of peace and compassion. I don't have a fully prepared text before me, though I have some papers here in front of me. If I were to read from a text, I'm not sure whether that would help you or hinder you. Even when I speak to you, you have to make an effort to understand what I am saying, because the sound waves that I will be producing have no meaning in themselves. You have to translate them into concepts. What hits your ears is simply a series of sound waves of varying length. But then we have between us a kind of convention by which we have, so to speak, agreed that this particular sound wave means this particular concept. Now, what I wanted to say is that the world is like that. Reality is like that. Reality speaks to us through symbols which we have to interpret. It doesn't come ready-made. We have to shape the meaning that we get out of reality. In a sense, reality is a set of symbols. It is like a book. One of my respected friends in Germany, Professor Hans Blumenberg, whose name has not yet come into theology very much, it will come in another 10 years, has suggested that the world is readable. In the old days, our forefathers used to speak about the intelligibility of the universe. But he says that is too simple, because it implies the idea that the world has one meaning and that you can pick it up. It's not that simple. The world is more like a book. A book is made of paper, a lot of ink blots of various shapes and patterns on it, but we have a convention by which we get meaning out of a book. Reality is like that. It is, Germans call it the Lesbarkeit. The Lesbarkeit. It's a readability. And the difficulty in the world is that we don't all read the same way. Though it is one book that we are looking at, somehow we get different signals from this book of reality. And that's one of the problems where, at least one of the aspects of conflict in our modern world. Why do I say this? Because religious people particularly fall a prey to the temptation to believe that the inner life is somehow more important than the outer world. That salvation or enlightenment has first to take place in the inner life of the soul, and sometimes religious people think that once the soul is saved or the consciousness is enlightened, then the problems of the world would take care of themselves. We have people who say that the only way to work for peace is to make each person peaceful. And the difficulty with that is, how long should I wait for that? I probably wouldn't live long enough. There is a kind of misreading of the book of reality when we detach the inner life from the rest of life and give it an undue priority. In fact, the inner life and the outer life are coordinated. And you cannot really have the kind of peace that we should have if we focus only on one side of it or the other. There are social peace activists who say that peace is entirely a matter of social construction and has nothing to do with your inner life. This is definitely wrong. But the other is wrong also. That if I take care of my own peace, then I'm all right, Jack, and the rest of you can do what you want. So that is the first thing I want to say, that there is this kind of coordination or correlation between the inner and the outer, and any discussion of peace should properly pay attention to both aspects. If modern physics tells us anything, and I've just come from a very top discussion on the theoretical foundations of modern physics in Europe, it is that there is no reality as such out there. As our Buddhist friends would say, it is pratitya samutpada, that the world that you experience arises under a set of conditions within here and a set of conditions out there, and that it is a relation between the two that we call reality. Reality is not something existing outside of me or inside of me. It is a perception, an interaction between the observer and the observed. That's what quantum physics has been trying to tell us. And so peace must simultaneously deal with the inner and the outer. That is the main point that I want to make this evening. Because, you see, religious people have been too lazy. We've been saying, oh yes, we'll look after our inner peace and then the world will look after its own peace. We have not really understood the nature of our own vocation as religious people if we do not make that correlation and connection. Now, let me make a second point very simply, namely that sometimes we work these priorities in a slightly different way. As everybody knows, a bodhisattva is one who has attained enlightenment but is never completely satisfied until everyone else comes to the same enlightenment. In Christianity also, there is sometimes that feeling that we are saved, but we do not achieve the end until we serve the others also. I believe this is a priority wrongly put. In our recent Hindu tradition, Sri Aurobindo, one of our great spiritual masters, also said that the most important thing is that the individual mind must evolve into the supermind, And after you have evolved and reached that stage of supermind, you can again devolve into the unevolved world and help it to evolve itself. But in all these cases, there is a chronological priority for one's own salvation. And then one looks after the salvation of others after your own has been attended to. Of course, you are right in saying that the Buddha himself first was enlightened before he set himself forward for the enlightenment of others. But that probably is a misreading of the great Buddha. Because in the teachings of the Buddha, as we have access to them, the Dharma and the Sangha are of equal importance. And in a sense, what is spoken of as the Dharma is not simply moral action as we conceive it today, but Dharma is a perception of the nature of the elements which constitute reality, and the Sangha, the corporate community, is equally important for your enlightenment. None of us become enlightened without the help of a community which fosters our enlightenment. That's why this idea that I will be enlightened first and then attend to the enlightenment of others, I will have peace first and then try to work for peace with others, is not totally accurate. The next main point that I wanted to make is that the resolution of conflict is not necessarily the essence of peace. Sometimes we think that peace means when there is a fight, there is a conflict, you put an end to that fight, and then you have peace. I think, as a Christian, that the kind of world, the kind of reality into which we have been placed is one in which conflict is central. Is an essential part of our reality. Nothing really develops without conflict. Even within our bodies, there are antibodies which have to conflict with inimical substances which come into us. And therefore, it is not the avoidance of conflict that constitutes the essence of peace, nor is it simply the resolution of conflict, but the utilization of conflict in a creative way. Again, one of the things that modern physics has been telling us is that the second law of thermodynamics, which tells us that everything is disintegrating, going from a more organized state into a less organized state, going from order to chaos, is not true. A physicist like Ilya Prigogine would tell you that in the process of development of chaos, a moment comes when the chaos suddenly becomes organized into a new form of life. That from chaos can come form and creativity. And therefore, conflict by itself is not bad. Only thing is, conflict must not be life-destructive. Conflict must not be inimical to the best interests of reality as a whole. To use conflict in the right way is perhaps one of the most important aspects of working for peace in our world today. Let me try to say that there are three levels at which conflict arises. And conflict is the arena within which freedom has to be won. If everything had been so prepared for us that we didn't have to struggle for it, we would become vegetables. Our essential humanity, our freedom, demands that we know how to handle conflict and come out of it as fully grown, more mature. The word mature is a dangerous word because once I looked up the dictionary and it said mature means nearly rotten. But by maturity, I mean the development of freedom to discern between the good and the evil and to follow the good. That is what maturity really means to me. And for this maturity, we have to deal with conflict at three different levels in our world today. And I shall try to be very brief in sort of depicting, not describing, not analyzing, but perhaps illustrating the three levels of conflict. Let me first tell you what I think the three levels are, so that wouldn't keep you unnecessarily anxious. On one level, there is political economic conflict in the world. And we do not, as a human race, arise to our full maturity until we do something about this political economic conflict. And that is why peace is inseparable from justice. At another level, perhaps even more important, is the cultural ideological level. There is serious conflict at the cultural ideological level, which is at the root of much of our conflict. And the third level, I am slightly anxious that you would disagree with me, but that's all right. Let me tell you what it is. I call it the cosmocratic level. Not cosmic, cosmocratic. There are powers other than the human which are at present influential in directing the course of reality. This is the fundamental affirmation I make. As an Eastern Christian, rather traditional, backward, but that is an affirmation which I make with all my limited knowledge. And these three levels must be seen, and we must find ways of dealing with these three levels. As I said, let me illustrate some of these levels, the political, economic level. Let me ask you just one question. In this country, as well as in the Soviet Union, most of the people want peace. They do not want war. But both sides keep themselves ready for war and getting even readier for war. Why is that? If you want peace, why can't we have peace? Especially in our democratic societies. The simple answer to that is that there are some people who think war is good for them. I don't know what people in California as a whole think, but in this part of the world, many people's livelihood is dependent on the war industry. And if you do not have the arms race and the arms trade, the factories will close down and they'll lose their jobs. So, That's one side. The other side is there are people who think that the highest and quickest profit comes from the war industry. You don't have to pay for advertisement. You don't have to pay for salesmen. You occasionally have to pay a bribe to some government officials, but that's all right. That's much cheaper than advertisement and sales staff. And the profit rate is very high on war industry. So, industrial magnates also want war. They know it's bad a little later, but by that time I can get 3 times my capital back as profit. A war will wait for another 10, 15, 20, 25 years, more or less until my last days, and then who cares what happens after that. This is where our problem is. War is built deeply into our economies. We cannot make democratic decisions because the political economy is a war-based political economy. And the place where religious people have a very big responsibility is to work out both the motivation and the mechanics of conversion, not individual conversion in the good old traditional Methodist sense, but conversion of a war-based economy to a peace-based economy. It is possible. A country like Sweden, for example, has made studies as to how to do it. England has begun studying this question. Many other countries are doing this. How to convert the economy from war production to peace production, and then you will have to worry about the problem how to get the political will to make that conversion possible, how to overcome the opposition of those who control the media, who control the election process. That is where the conflict becomes creative. That is where it is not important to avoid the conflict, but to keep the conflict creative, redeeming. I just give you one example of this conflict. I could give you many other examples. There are some people within the market economy world, among those who control the way we live and cooperate to produce, who believe that at this time the arms race and the arms trade are essential for the survival of capitalism itself. Because the market is saturated. The world market is saturated. It's difficult to expand this market indefinitely, especially since the biggest markets like China and India, the purchasing power is still very low. But the countries from which these poor people come, like India and China again, are good markets for arms. So, you can keep expanding your market by creating an artificial need for armaments in the world. And for that purpose, you can sometimes tell Iraq that Iran is going to start a war on you, and then go and tell Iraq, look, Iran is coming. And we outside Europe. And that means a tremendous amount of weapons have been consumed. And unless these weapons are consumed, the war industry cannot go on. It is this system which we have to attack. In that system, it's not only Californians who have to change, but people from India also have to change. Because recently, just a year ago, we increased our defense budget by 17% from one year to the next. Why? Oh, we have many reasons. Pakistan, this, that, everything else. Well, one reason may be that the defense budgets are the main source of income for the political parties. You give kickbacks for every defense contract to the ruling political party. And so the political party depends for its survival on the increased defense expenditure. That may be true in some other countries also. But there is a hope that by making nations more and more armed, and that is what worries us, the oil countries have become heavily armed. The poor countries, which have no way of looking after the food and health and literacy of their people, are spending more and more on armaments. To whose benefit? That is a question which we have to ask. Well, the military power can also be used for toppling systems of governments which we don't like. Military power can be used to wear down the competitor. Because if the Soviet Union cannot afford to spend as much on military expenditure as they have been doing, then they will wear down. And this question of wearing down the socialist countries until they break down is also part of the intention of capitalism. So these are the causes at which we have to look if we are to look at the political economic reasons for war, and not simply the resolution of this conflict and that conflict, but the overall system. Second, let me say something about the cultural identical conflict realm, because that is a little more subtle. You see, in the UNESCO circles some years ago, there was a kind of slogan which said, technology is by nature universal, whereas culture is by nature local. This is a kind of very interesting paradox, and therefore the wedding of technology and culture in each local situation creates problems. But it's not as simple as all that. Technology has now become a major identity symbol of the Western culture. And wherever it goes, it tries to raise down the old culture, which doesn't fit into the requirements of technology and the technological systems. And therefore, people find themselves in great conflict within themselves between the demands of technological civilization and the demands of their own cultural tradition. Now, the worst offenders are the educated elite in our own countries, those who rule us. They are the ones who are caught in this business of the technological civilization, Western civilization, and their own culture. And this question of identity has become so important. What is the problem in the Punjab with our Sikh people? Again, it's a question of identity. They feel that their identity is being trampled upon by the majority community. What is the problem with Khomeini? He feels that the identity of the Iranian people has been sort of road-rollered by the technological civilization, and this identity business becomes the cause of major aggression. And this is one of the fundamental problems of our world today, whether you take the Irish or the Middle Eastern Jews or Arabs, any of these situations, Sri Lanka, Tamils, Sinhalese, everywhere, it's identity that lies behind conflict. And within that cultural identity, religion plays an important part. And that is why religious people have a very big job in making religion never a pretext for fighting others. It is the worst misuse of religion to fight others. Well, thirdly, I shall try to conclude because my time is up. What do I mean by conflict at the cosmocratic level? I do not believe that we are the only actors in the drama of life. We are actors. We can make significant decisions. But there are other influences bearing down upon us. The kind of world that Carlos Castaneda entered and wrote about. The world which has so many levels with different kinds of beings, some benign, some malign, some themselves caught in the struggle between good and evil. And therefore, we must be aware that there are forces which are not completely evident to our senses involved in the present conflicts. Why do sudden splurges of violence take place in the streets of California when people, ordinary car drivers, start shooting each other? There must be some kind of a malign force which takes delight in making people do that kind of crazy thing. And we have to be sensitive to these forces. Well, let me try to conclude by saying that our responsibility, therefore, is a threefold responsibility. The first is that religious people should make the struggle for justice a high priority and cannot say that the inner life is more important. The inner life and the struggle for justice must be coordinated and correlated. Second thing I would like to say about is that the question of identity should get a lot of attention from religious people. Because identity is, of course, never always closed. Identity is a growing, dynamic thing. And you cannot have any group's identity fixed at a particular point in time and space. But we must help religious identities to become open identities towards other cultures and peoples. I'm glad that this thing is happening in California, but in general, Western civilization has not been very open to other cultures and civilizations. There are exceptions, but most of the time it has been a one-way traffic. The West trying to teach the world and seldom willing to learn from the world. And if you want to have a world in which 4,000 million people who are the adherents of the various religions, plus 1,000 who are secular people, have to live together, we must be able to find some way of opening our identities, being willing to understand. And that is why when Professor Houston Smith spoke this morning about tolerance, I have always been anti-tolerance because, well, my culture is full of tolerance and I know how intolerant some tolerant people can become. I don't want tolerance. I don't want to be tolerated by you, which means I'm a nuisance, but because you are kind and generous to me, I will be tolerated. I don't want that. We should learn to make religions respect each other, but respect on the basis of genuine understanding. Because if the respect is simply formal respect out of reverence to some law, it won't work, it won't be authentic. Only genuine, sympathetic, open understanding can create this kind of respect. And that's one of the big tasks of the religious forces in this world. The third thing, finally, what do we do about these cosmocratic forces? They're such a nuisance. But I want to say this, that human beings are capable of generating positive forces against which the malign forces are powerless. I do believe that religious people should always bless never curse. Just like you say, always love, never hate. Even inside, we must desire that other people may flourish. That's what blessing means. The positive forces must come from religious people, which means the life of prayer. I as soon as the Venerable Rinpoche walked into that room, I said, here is a source of peace, because he radiates in his own life a positive force, and those who are sensitive can sense it right away that it is there. Now if we all become sources of this kind of benign, blessing, benedictory waves that come out of us, they will have a powerful influence over the cosmic forces that want evil. And that is why prayer, meditation, and a disciplined personal life is one of the essential aspects of working for peace. But then the other two that I have spoken about, namely the political, economic, and the identity, cultural thing, also has to be taken care of. And I hope that here in this meeting, all of us will commit ourselves to work on all these three levels. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I think you'll all agree with me that this is an occasion in which we in California have had a rich opportunity to learn from the world. We've been given rich fare on a theological, psychological, and social level. We're running somewhat behind schedule, but I do want to give both of our speakers a chance to react to and converse with each other for a few minutes. So would Your Excellency like to engage the Metropolitan on any of the issues that he brought up?
Well, I think it is, I'm afraid, pretty much the same.
Don't be afraid.
Well, I think when we talk about the forces from different dimensions, I personally felt a little bit curious about it, because when we look into different cultures, always there is a kind of belief that human beings somehow can be affected by something greater or more powerful than themselves or something. But I really am not so clear when you have spoken, because from the Christianity point of view, how can that be related with the God having sort of ultimate power over everything?
Well, I would say that God is not a dictator.
That's great.
He allows all free beings to participate in the act of creation. He did not complete this cosmos, but gave freedom to beings within it to twist it this way or that way and to shape it by the interplay of these forces. And these forces are there, you experience them every day, but we don't need to be afraid of them. We have within our power these spiritual forces which can overcome the evil forces, and the good forces are not even allowed to compel us to do good. They also have to keep persuading us to do good, not compelling us. Neither the evil nor the good can compel us. but they are constantly trying to influence us. That is
Beautiful.
Christian teaching from my tradition.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Your Reverence, do you have any questions you want to raise with Rinpoche?
Now, I would like to ask the question, why is it that we who belong to the religious leadership in all religions have only more recently begun to take an interest in peace? Why have we always been too lazy about this? Only now I think there are more peace movements coming out of a religious orientation. But it wasn't so until a few years ago. Some of us were regarded as crazy for having done that.
Well, I think there's many ways to look into it, I think. Because far as I can see it, if a person is practicing true religion, I don't think we can say we have been lazy for doing something, not doing something for peace. But I think, like anything, there is lots of individuals in religious practice who are, I hope I'm not having tremendous, how do you say, big mouth to say such a thing, but not too sincere. I really am afraid so. And that somehow makes some sort of totally another body of human activity, which is something called religion, and which somehow cuts away from the rest of the human activities. By looking into Buddhism, I can point out in which point it says that the principle of the religion is principle of everything. There's one very clear and very brief and rather simple thing. It says that every relative manifestation involves with ultimate essence, and there is the right way to transmute it, or there is a wrong way to, let's say, enlarge that negativity. So I think lots of religious people in the past have been misusing religion in a way. I think so. Not all.
No.
But that might make it appear that way, But I don't think true religious people have been lazy about peace.
Well,
Yes.
I would like to agree with you. I agree with you that religious leadership has often failed in relating religion to the whole of life. We have been tempted to make it a department of life rather than something that deals with the whole of life. But there is the other question: have organized religion been too dependent on the wealth of the privileged in the past and presently? I'm just putting that as a question.
Yes.
I want to answer.
Yes. I will consider that is a very good question. With all the respect, of course. Yes. Well, I think there is differences in its particular history and interdependence. I think there was a certain time in our history where religion and secular existence have been very much dependent upon each other. And I think lots of people might think that is something that shouldn't have happened. But I can't say I agree with that, because life should have a principle, and religion should have a life. And when the religion becomes part of the people's life, and people becomes the part of religion, I think that is a wonderful interdependence. If that happens in a true way, I think that's very, very real. But then I absolutely agree with what you are hinting as a question, that there have been lots of religious institutions which might involve with sort of sense of injustice, taking advantages, using the name and the power of religion for personal gains. And that happens. Unfortunately, that happens. As you just put previously, that the God let us play the game. I think maybe that is part of the game. So I think that part has been harmful in many cases, I think.
I would only add that because of that dependence, there has been an unconscious reluctance to take strong positions against injustice in society.
Yes, those people who take advantage, they get a chance. Yes, yes.
Thank you. I don't want to bring this to a close without giving a chance for at least a few questions from the floor. Does anyone have a question they'd like to address to one or both of our speakers? Yes.
I think you should be able to look into the particular situation. This time, yourself displayed as an anger. Okay. Into this situation very clearly, because most of the time what happens is when a person gets into a situation which is obvious or maybe by surprise, that will exaggerate the situation, and you will not be able to look into it wisely and carefully. So if you develop sense of clearness which will allow you to look into the particular situation clearly, then there the chance for you to be able to use that particular situation meaningfully will be greater. I think simply, every situation that we consider negative, I consider them as sort of one way or another involved with unwiseness. And unwiseness most of the time are resulted by not being clear. And if you can establish the clarity I think in both of our religion we might call it contemplations, meditations. That sort of particular methods will allow you to develop that kind of quality. So therefore, then the next step, how to get the best out of it, will happen. But one thing almost impossible to answer for this question is that each person's particular neurosis, you might call it, and each person's also particular situations, particular causes will be different. So very hard to generalize.
May I respond to that same question? Well, I am one who gets angry very easily, so I can answer it out of experience. My Bible says to me very positively, be ye angry and sin not. That's what St. Paul wrote. Go ahead and be angry, but don't sin. And let not the sun go down upon your wrath. And give no foothold to the evil one. Those are all consecutive sentences. So he says it's all right to be angry, but don't sleep on it. Don't let it go down into your subconscious. Become bitterness and self-justification. Then the devil will get a foothold into your subconscious and make your life miserable. First answer. Second answer. Anger can be turned into two different things. One is bitterness and wrath, which is destructive. The other is indignation, moral indignation, which can be creative. But that moral indignation is usually not exercised on your own behalf, but on behalf of a whole group of people who have been insulted, whose dignity has been trampled upon, whose privileges have been denied to them, and who have been dominated. Such group indignation, moral indignation, can be put to creative use, but do it always with a sense of humor.
Yes, in the back.
Question for Gregorios, please. Would you please expand a little bit on what you call the malign forces or the evil forces? For example, are you referring to something similar to what St. Paul called powers and principalities, or what is in the Gospel of Mark, demons?
Where the seat of the demons is or are is not always easy to locate. That's one of the toughest things in life, is to locate the presence of the evil one. If you say to the state, that is a total condemnation of the state, and we are now seeing that the state has both positive and negative functions, and therefore to analyze the state as evil is a temptation which we should resist. Similarly, from my perspective, nothing exists in the world which is totally evil. Because total evil is total non-being. It would not exist. Evil always exists in association with good, with the possibility of appearing as good to some people. Now, the better part of wisdom is to discern just where, right in the middle of the good, that evil is present and sort of exorcise it. It requires a kind of spiritual discernment. And there is no general law by which you can say something which is good today can tomorrow be evil, and vice versa. And therefore there is no way in which I can locate evil permanently anywhere. Evil is manifold, evil is shifting, evil is sly and cunning, but it does exist as forces with almost personal kind of characteristics. And that's all I will say at this time. I do not want to say. Cosmokratoros is the exact Greek of principalities, world rulers of this darkness about which the New Testament speaks. But we must not become too sociological in our analysis of these cosmocratic powers and too quickly identify the state or the political machine with the evil force. The evil force operates through them, but good forces also operate through them. So there is no one way of locating it permanently and for all situations.
You want to speak to malign forces from a Vajrayana point of view?
I think it was taken care.
All right. Yes.
This is a question for both of you. I would like to see how you relate the increasing visibility of female identity in the world, and particularly in the Western world, with the increasing concern for peace in the world.
I'll answer it, but I want to.
Well, I must ask you to say it once again. I didn't really get it.
Okay, then I'll try to answer it. In that process, you will understand the question.
Yes. That sounds very helpful.
Well,
Thank you.
Traditionally, in most societies, not in all, women have been relegated to the inside of the home, and the outside of the home was supposed to be managed by men. Well, that has been largely true in most societies, and that is why we are where we are. There's no doubt about it for me in my mind. But the increasing presence of the women in shaping society is beginning to show in many places, not only in peace activity. But as a professional peacenik, it is my conviction that only when more women become genuinely active, not only in peace work, but also in the work for justice, will our society have some hope of changing. We men have become sort of fixed in the rut in which we have been moving for so many centuries. And we need somebody to push us out of that and take over part of the responsibility for shaping society. But I would still say that the feminist movement, of which I have been a sympathetic observer for the last 20, 30 years, but before that I was once honored with the title of honorary woman. But I would say that the feminist movement, just like the black liberation movement, wherever it fails to identify itself with all the oppressed of the world, becomes distorted. That happened to the black people. It was beginning to happen to the feminist movement also. But insofar as these movements, and that was great Martin Luther King, he said, black liberation has no meaning if it is separated from the plight of the people in Vietnam, for example. He saw that the whole oppressed must work together. Women are oppressed, but there are also men and women who are oppressed in various parts of the world, and all the oppressed must join forces together. Some people even say, and this is very mischievous, but some people even say that the feminist movement came up at the particular time when it came up because it was created by the media to distract attention from the call for justice in the world by the poor of the world. That's only a mischievous side comment, but you have to be watchful about that. All the oppressed should be together. That's
Well, I suppose this is my turn. I think Reverend Abbott's, Bishop's, comment about the retirement of the men, I think it sounds wonderful. I think when I look from Buddhist point of view, according to Vajrayana Buddhism, the Tibetan Buddhism, there is a kind of role that the feminine manifestation and the male manifestation represents. The male is represented as skillful means, and female is represented as wisdom. So that is the kind of principle which is used. That doesn't mean woman is full of wisdom but totally with no skillful means. Man is full of skillful means but with no wisdom. It doesn't mean that. But basically, for a person, a woman or a man, to fulfill the purpose of being on earth, one has to have the balance of skillful means and the wisdom, both of it. So, following that principle, it is not so much that a man is better than a woman or a woman is better than a man. But if there is the balance of the feminine quality, the wisdom, and the masculine quality, the skillful means, is balanced in each person, then that will definitely cause a kind of very gentle but most powerful, let's say, synchronization of whole thing. I myself have mixed experience with all of these movements. The movements are very good when there is no justice, when no one thinks about it, no one willing to think about it. I think the movements are good because people need some kind of trouble. You know, they like to get into trouble first and then do something about it rather than prevent the trouble before it comes. You know. But since those kind of movements are always there, then it might also create something else. You know, men try to be women, or women try to be men. It doesn't make much sense to me, honestly speaking, because each have its own role. A father can never be a mother. A mother can never be a father. Father always will be father, and mother always will be mother. So I think the basic, as our Reverend Bishop previously pointed out, the identity, I think that's very, very important things to maintain, I think. So I hope I'm answering your question.
Thank you. I think I now need to ask the speakers if they'd like to give us each one brief last word of wisdom before we adjourn tonight. Your Reverend?
Too late and in the evening, and too much of the jet lag is still there. But I do believe that the world is now in a kind of situation like the birth pangs of the new. Something new could emerge from all this. And we must have the courage to face all the present anomalies, inconsistencies, conflicts as a kind of necessary prelude to the creativity of something good and new, not completely, but better. And I think we must have the optimism to move forward like that.
Thank you. Your Excellency.
Well, I think there isn't too much that should be said here more than what both of us try to communicate to you. But one last thing, it is very much like a repeating actually, is all of us should have very, very clear understanding that when we talk about the world or peace, we should not put ourselves as someone else and then the rest as a separate thing. We are one of the now 5,000 million human beings. We are one of it. And we have the responsibility for everyone just as they are responsible for each of us. I think most of us say nice things and have good intentions, but I find that we say, it should be this way, but those people are doing it in such a way, blaming on others. Okay? When it is necessary thing, we be practical, we blame others to get something done. But before we blame others, I think it is very, very important. We should pull ourselves together, and we should put it into action before we accuse others. I think this is quite important, and we need that balance. So I totally agree with what Bishop is saying on his last remarks. So the combination of this will be most appropriate, I think.
Thank you.